Hello and welcome to Torah Thoughts. The portion of the Torah that we read this week's Parsha, is Beshalach. It starts off with Vayehi Beshalach Paro et ha'am, and so it was when Paro sent out the nation, meaning he had sent the nation of Israel out of Egypt. Actually, he begged the nation of Israel to leave Egypt, having suffered the 10 plagues. And the Torah describes to us how after a few days, Paro realizing, what have I done? And he and his advisors have a change of heart, and they regret letting the Jews go, and now they chase after the Jews as the Jews leave Egypt. He comes upon the Jews as the Jews are trapped, well, at least Paro thinks the Jews are trapped, between his army and the Red Sea. And of course, the famous story then happens where the sea splits, the Jews walk through the split sea, the Egyptians chase after them, and of course the water comes crashing down on them and kills all of them except Paro himself. So of course, this week's Parsha is very famous for that story. But immediately after the story, something else very interesting happens. Now that the nation of Israel is in the desert, they turn and complain to Moshe. They come upon an area where there's water, but the water isn't sweet. The water is bitter, and it's not drinkable. So immediately they turn against him and they say, you took us out of Egypt because what? There was not enough graves in Egypt for us to be buried there, so you brought us to the desert for us to die here? We have no water, we're going to die. Now granted, this is not a simple thing. Everyone knows if you're in the desert and you don't have water, that can be a dangerous thing. You can die. But then again, how do you not trust in God, having just witnessed the most incredible chapter in all of history, the 10 plagues? God turned nature on its head. Water turning to blood. Infestations in the country where only the Egyptians were suffering the infestations and the Jews weren't, including the lice, the wild animals, hail mixed with ice and fire, and of course the death of the firstborn, where every firstborn in Egypt, firstborn insects, died, but not the Jews. And that, if that didn't prove who's in charge of this world, then comes the splitting of the sea. God made the Red Sea defy gravity. I mean, could you just imagine an ocean turns to two walls and you walk right through it? And if you think it's some sort of freak of nature, no. The moment the Jews walked through it, the water came crashing down on the Egyptians. After experiencing something like this, how do you not have trust? Well, they complain. We need water. And God says to Moshe, he shows him a piece of wood. Pick up this wood and throw it into the water. And the water became sweet. But the Jews weren't done complaining. And then they complained, we have no food. And then God says to Moshe, okay, tomorrow there will be food. At night there will be quail, birds, so you can eat meat. And in the morning there will be man, which was a very unusual, miraculous form of bread. And this week's Parsha is also famous for the story of the man, the Parshat Haman. It is a tradition for people to recite this particular passage, and that's supposed to be a segula, a good omen for a good income, for wealth. And that's a bit of a question to me. There are many areas in the Torah where prosperity is described. It's all over Deuteronomy. It's in the Shema itself. It's in Parshat Bechukotai towards the end of Bamidbar, Numbers. In Bahar, there are many places where the Torah describes prosperity and how we have to be thankful for prosperity, how to earn prosperity. Why is it that this parsha about man in the desert, that's the chapter that we read as some sort of an omen for prosperity? Well, I'm going to get back to that question, but I want to also focus on a different question. What's the connection between the story of the Jews leaving Egypt, going through the Dead Sea, and then the story with Jews complaining about not having water, not having food with the man? The Torah, we know, is more than just a chronological story. There's connections. When one story is connected to another, that means that there's something there. There's a reason why the two of them are placed so close together. Well, let's just look at what was the meaning, and the Torah describes exactly what. The meaning of God bringing all these plagues on Paro. Every time God explains why he's bringing these plagues, why he's splitting the sea, He says, so that the Egyptians will know that I am God, so that the world will know that I am God, so that I will gain my respect and my notoriety through the Egyptians. So God is basically bringing the plagues on Egypt and the punishments on Egypt to prove that He controls nature. And yet, what happens here? The Jews, when the Egyptians came upon Israel, and not only Pharaoh thought that they were trapped, the nation of Israel themselves thought they were trapped. And once again, they turn to Moshe and they say, "Oh my God, you brought us out of Egypt just so that the Egyptians can chase us out and kill us." And God says, He says to Moshe, "What are you complaining about? Stop praying. Go forward." And so we see that. And by the way, the Midrash tells us that for the sea to split, the Jews had to first enter. And one man in particular, Nachshon ben Aminadav, he jumped into the water, and then it split. So there was a literal leap of faith. You want your miracle, you got to show that you earn it. You got to show that you believe yourself worthy of it. Now, generally we're told you don't rely on miracles, but when God shows you it's a time of miracles, then show that you believe in Him, and then you'll get your miracle. And the man is fairly similar to that. Again, after having gone through the 10 plagues, the splitting of the sea, you wanted water. Boom, water in the desert. It was bitter water, it's suddenly sweet water. Now you're complaining that there's no food. Now mind you, the Jews left, if we read from last week's Parsha, with crazy amounts of flocks, of cattle, and they had plenty to eat. But they want bread. But they don't want to kill their cattle. I mean, it was more than simply not having food. They were able to survive. But the question was, oh my God, can we survive? For how long can we survive? It's this question about what's going to be in the future. And again, where's the trust, right? So God actually says, I'll give them bread, I'll give them man, but I'm going to test them to see whether they follow my instructions. Now, what were the instructions on the man? God says, look, here's how the man works. I give you man in the morning, and you go out and you collect as much man as you need for the day. And that's going to happen every day. Do not put away for a rainy day. Don't collect more than 1 day's worth of man, because if you do, it'll spoil, and it's going to have worms in it. And why is God doing that? Because God wants to see, do you trust me finally? After everything that's happened, now I'm going to give you, and Hashem calls it bread. You're going to get bread from heaven. Rather than having to it's a desert. You can't plant it. The bread will come from the heaven. It'll develop in the dew, as the dew comes down onto the earth. And now that I give you that, do you trust me that I'll do it again tomorrow? And if you don't trust me, then you're not deserving. And so that's where it's tied to the splitting of the sea and to the story about the water. God is basically telling the nation of Israel, now it's time for trust. I'm going to take you through the desert now, and you're not going to survive in this desert without me and my miracles. So stop complaining and trust. So you can't get more than 1 day's portion of man every day. But don't think that that's just the way nature is. It's just some sort of a way that's the nature of the man. No. On Fridays, you're going to have to get 2 portions. If you don't get 2 portions on Fridays, you won't have any food on Shabbat, on Saturday. Why? Because the nature of the man isn't simply because that's the nature of the world. The nature of the man, the way the man behaves, the properties of the man, is what God says it should be. And 6 days a week, this man will only last 1 day. And on the 7th day, rather 5 days a week, the man will only last 1 day. On the 6th day, it'll last 2 days. So it'll supply you for the 7th day as well. And the man didn't spoil. And again, this was part of the whole setup about how it was a leap of faith. When you go out on Monday and you collect all your man, do you have faith? You're not going to collect any more, because I know that God will provide more on Tuesday. And that's where it ties into income. God is telling the Jews, you're going to have, and the Jews didn't know that they're going to be in there for a stretch of 40 years, but ultimately they were. For as long as you're in the desert, you will have everything you need. You put them away for a rainy day? Why? Tomorrow there's going to be more money. And this is the way we're supposed to look at our income. We pray to God to give us income. But some people have $1 billion, and some people make money and they live day by day. Someone who really, really trusts in God, and this is something that It's a very difficult thing, and most of us don't have, deep down we know we should have that kind of faith, but it's difficult. If you live day by day, but you fully trust, I have enough money to last me today, tomorrow God will give me enough money for tomorrow. Do you see that as the same thing as, say, someone who's got $1 billion in the bank? He's got $1 billion invested in the stock market, and his stockbroker, you don't hold the money. If someone's got $1 billion, they're not literally holding their $1 billion. I got money in the bank, I got money in the stock market, and anytime I need, I can call up my banker, and my banker will give me my money. Well, here the story of the man, and again, same thing with income. God is saying, you got $1 billion if you trust me. Whatever you need today, you get today. Whatever you need tomorrow, it's there. You'll get it tomorrow. God's in control of it. What? You trust your banker at Citibank or TD Bank or wherever your money is. You trust the FDIC, but you don't trust God. When we pray for prosperity, the focus of our prayers has to come from how it worked with the man. Sure, once we left the desert, we went back to living through the regular course of the way God designed nature. Yes, you do want to put away for a rainy day, because that's the instructions of God. You put away as much as possible, but ultimately we need to understand all of our efforts, putting away, investing, working hard, educating ourselves so that we can get a better job, all of that, that's the effort that God instructs us to put in. No different than God instructing us to go out into the desert and collect the money. The outcome is that's all in His hands. And there you need to have trust. Some of us will have more, and that more is supposed to last us for as long as, let's say, if you have $1 million, as long as $1 million lasts, God gives you that, and they'll last you so long. Other people live day by day, but they also have what they need. Now, I know that's a difficult thing, for all of us, to instill in ourselves. But that's why, if we read the parsha about, in Kitavo, for example, when you bring your first fruits, you bring it to the temple and you thank God for everything He gave you. Of course you got to thank God for everything He gave you. But that doesn't express how no matter how much or how little we have, it's all the same. And not only should we not worry, don't worry, you'll get tomorrow what you need tomorrow and so on, but then there's also a time for us to stop doing anything altogether. And it goes against what we might think is common sense. It's counterintuitive. The more we produce, the more we'll have. God says no. You'll produce for 6 days. On the 7th day, don't. But how am I going to make a living? Imagine you invest in a business. You put everything you had into a business that you're just getting it off the ground. And normally when people do that, the key to success is you got to hustle. You got to be there. You got to put in hours. And God says, yep, you're going to be working 24/6, but not the 7th day. And if you do that, then you succeed. Again, that we see in the mun. And the story as it goes in the mun is there was always these troublemakers who tried to disprove the reality. So what they would do is they would gather more than one portion of mun so that they could show the next day, you see, I gathered more for a rainy day. I had more. But what happened was the mun that they gathered got spoiled, and tomorrow everybody else had mun, they just worked for nothing. Then, of course, the same people on Friday, they only gathered one day's portion. And the next day, on Saturday, on Shabbat, they didn't have any. Right? So this is, again, the proof. If you trust in God, you get. If you don't, you don't. And if you look at income that way, and I'm not saying that I do, we all have to try. Nobody's perfect, but this is what we have to strive for. To close your eyes and say, I'm going to follow instructions. Whatever the instructions are. If I'm supposed to work, if I'm supposed to not work, how much should I work, how much should I try? I'm going to follow instructions. And the outcome is going to be the outcome. That's what we have to strive for. That's the perfection. And that's why God puts it in this parsha, and that's the prayer for success. The prayer for prosperity and success isn't, let me have a big business, a successful business with a lot of trucks going in and out of my company and a lot of workers in my offices. That's nice. And in some cases, that's the way in which God provides you your success. But that's not the key to success. And immediately after the story, what happens? Finally, the setup is there. The setup between trust in the miracles that God has showed us And we still have to do physically, we have to do our part. The Jews still have to go out and collect the man from the ground, didn't they? So you have that setup, you have that mixture. And then what happens is the Jews get attacked by Amalek, who became our nemesis for history. And the story with Amalek is not done yet. And right after the Jews were attacked by Amalek, Moshe goes and sends out his protege, Yehoshua, and he says to him, gather an army and go out and fight Amalek. Now, there are many interpretations that fighting Amalek is also, it's this eternal battle that we're locked into with Amalek. Amalek is the descendant of Esav, and it's also supposedly a metaphor for a spiritual battle because we need to wipe out the Amalek within us. What is the Amalek within us? What does Amalek represent? And again, why is the story of Amalek connected to the Exodus and the splitting of the sea and the story of the mud? It's because Amalek is the representation, it's the antithesis of what we are supposed to be, in that we are supposed to live in this world, but our purpose is spiritual, and our success comes from spirituality. God provides. Amalek is all material. It's all physical, and it's all. Amalek lives within nature. The Amalekites, they weren't cavemen. They were smart people. They were educated people, but they lived within nature. And we live within nature, but we know that nature stems from spirituality, and that's the battle. It is a spiritual battle. Not only the Amalek within ourselves, but the very war between our people and Amalek is, how does the world run? And again, God gives the world to humanity, and the world runs the way we operate in the world. But how is the world supposed to operate? How are we supposed to run the world? Do we have a partnership with God in which we do our part and He provides the results? Or do we look at nature, which, even though we recognize that God created nature, but do we look at the standing rules and try to figure it out ourselves? And that's the eternal war between Amalek. And there are times when Amalek wins, there are times when Amalek has the upper hand, there are times when we have the upper hand. And ultimately, though, right, and this is something, again, spiritually, when we reach that perfection, and one day, God willing, we will, what happens is we win in the sense that we defeat the frame of mind, we defeat the school of thought that everything is purely physical, everything is purely what we observe. It's like the world is given to us, like an appliance is given to us, and an owner's manual is given. Do you try to observe this appliance and figure it out by yourself? Or do you at some point come to your senses and say, let's go by the owner's manual? We will eventually go by the owner's manual, and then it'll operate the way it was intended to operate. And that's when Mashiach comes. Well, that's my Torah thought. Thanks for listening. Shabbat Shalom.